There are few more fascinating sagas in modern Mormonism than the rise and fall of Tim Ballard. At one point, he was a poster child for the Utah region, a national celebrity with best-selling books published by the LDS Church, and a movie that made him out to be the hero, and that allegedly told the story of how he was a modern-day abolitionist. But within a matter of weeks, in 2023, all of that crumbled. The empire fell apart, and Ballard was fired from the organization that he founded and denounced by the LDS Church in which he had been a celebrity. I'd like to narrate this rise and fall story, but in a way that emphasizes a broader cultural context, legacies, and most importantly, the lessons. And I'll note that I'm in no way telling the entire story of what went on there. There have been a number of details that have been leaked out from court cases that are still ongoing, many of the details of which are nauseating and quite salacious. I'm mostly going to avoid all those details and focus instead on what's generally accepted as on the public record. And then I'll close the video talking about some of Ballard's more recent accusations in which he claims that the LDS Church itself has become a part of the deep state. Let's dig in. Let's cover the bare bones background. Tim Ballard was born and raised in California. He grew up in the LDS Church, served in LDS mission to Chile, and received his BA from Brigham Young University. And then it was while he was working for the Department of Homeland Securities that he claims he learned that the government was ill-equipped to manage some of the world's thorniest problems, especially sex trafficking and the slavery of young children, especially young women. And so in 2013, he and a small group of others founded Operation Underground Railroad, what I'll refer to as OUR from here on out, an organization that claimed to save these young women and children from global slave rings. Through those efforts, he became a national and in some cases international celebrity among some circles for his anti-trafficking activities. He received millions of dollars in fundraising over the next decade and became famous for a number of high-profile raids. Now, there are some allegations, again in these court records that I don't want to go too deep into, that his desire for celebrity preceded and framed the organization of OUR, with some documentation to show that they envisioned it as a TV production from the very beginning. Again, I don't want to go into all of that, but what is clear that from the very start of this, Ballard was very consciously crafting an image designed for a particular moment and culture. And it's that image and that argument that I believe tells us a much larger story and contains a number of significant lessons. And before I get any further, please remember to subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet, especially if you like these geeky and nerdy deep dives into historical topics, particularly Mormon history. Every Monday, I try to do these deep dives on particular topics. I just finished a 2-month-long series on Mormonism and American politics that you can go back to watch. On Wednesdays, I do videos that connect the past to the present. And on Fridays, I try to peel back the curtain to talk about some particularly influential books and documents and try to understand the historian's craft so that you can understand how history is constructed. All right, let's get back to the video. Now, simultaneous to founding OUR, Ballard was starting to present himself as a historian. This is what I mean when I say he was crafting a particular image of both himself, the present, and the past. And he wrote a series of books that were from a particular Mormon perspective that drew on Mormon sensibilities and became bestsellers within the Mormon community. Most notorious are what's known as the Hypothesis Trilogy, 3 books that recast history in a way that fit a Mormon worldview that draft these significant historical figures, who Ballard would call heroes, into the Mormon cause. These were the hypothesis series was started with the Lincoln hypothesis in 2016, the Washington hypothesis in 2018, and the Pilgrim hypothesis in 2020. Now, I need to emphasize how ludicrous it is to take these historical figures who have received more books than nearly any other historical person and provide not just a counter narrative to the generally accepted consensus on these figures, but a narrative that goes completely against what most historians recognize as established historical facts. Now, of course, historians frequently disagree on points, and there are truly revisionist takes that can reanalyze these figures. But these tales in the Hypothesis trilogy go far beyond that and are making up history in order to match a theological worldview, which I'll get to in a bit. In many ways, the Hypothesis trilogy is a textual embodiment of the Mormon desire to claim all historical figures as their own. A textual posthumous baptism, just like baptism for the dead, here is a textual baptizing of these historical figures to make them Mormon. Now, he started this story with the Lincoln Hypothesis, the first book to come out in that trilogy, in which he claimed that Abraham Lincoln read the Book of Mormon during the throes of the Civil War, which taught him the truths of human equality and inspired the Emancipation Proclamation. Let me say it at the outset, this is nonsense history. It is, if a professor were to get a student writing a paper on this, it would get an F. It makes these claims based on the idea, the claim that a Book of Mormon was checked out of the Library of Congress under Abraham Lincoln's name. Well, obviously that shows Abraham was reading it and that inspired him. However, I mean, at the very basic level, just because the White House signs out a book from the Library of Congress in Lincoln's name does not mean that that was Lincoln checking it out. There were hundreds of people who would have had access to checking the book out in Lincoln's name. And further, we have lots of documentation on Lincoln's views and what he was reading and what he was thinking. And he was not shy to express his opinion on the Mormons, whom he saw as heresy and whom he tried to vanquish. Remember, the founding of the Republican Party, he was the first Republican president. The founding of the Republican Party was based on destroying the twin relics of barbarism, slavery, and polygamy. And Lincoln himself signed the first anti-polygamy federal legislation. So in other words, this is just wholesale making up history, but to a particular end. Now, he followed that book up, Ballard followed up that book with the Washington Hypothesis, which another ludicrous claims that George Washington was visited in the midst of the American Revolution by angels, one of whom Ballard speculates could have been Moroni, and that inspired Washington to know what to do, gave him the resolve, and eventually led to the divine founding of the United States, defeating the British Empire. But as historians have shown, and I'll link to a story in the description of this video from Keep a Pitchin' In, a wonderful history blog that details the many, many problems with this story. Most notably, the historical account that Ballard is basing this on of George Washington being visited by angels comes from an allegory that was published nearly a century after the American Revolution and was quite clearly meant to be taken as fiction. Now, either Ballard just doesn't have the historical skills to recognize that genre and what was going on, or he is consciously misinterpreting it. And further, we have a good sense of Washington's religious beliefs, and it's easy to say that the theological ideas that are associated with Washington in Ballard's book do not in any way match the broad scholarly consensus on Washington believed on divine intervention, angels, and the supernatural in general. Now, the final book in the trilogy was the Pilgrim Hypothesis, which draws from a white nationalist literature that tries to claim the Pilgrims were not just fleeing religious liberty, but they were divinely driven, they were inspired, and that they were part of, this is crucial, a chosen lineage. This is an ethnogenesis sense of divine approval, and it also fit into the broader LDS narrative of preparing the land for the restoration. We have lots of great scholarship on the Pilgrims that came out in 2020, that same year. That was the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower. And once again, in case you're missing the common theme, what Ballard presents goes squarely against the general scholarly consensus. Now, Ballard would say that's a good thing. He said he would claim that scholars are hiding this true history and that he alone is able to uncover what actually happened and the divine message. Of course, this is a declension narrative of the secular academy refusing to acknowledge the religious foundations of the nation. And this is actually part of a broader Christian evangelical movement in America. People like David Barton and other evangelical scholars who try to recast the founders as devout Christians. David Barton, most famously for his book on Jefferson, The Jefferson Lies, where he tries to claim that Thomas Jefferson was actually a devout Christian, and all these claims that he was a deist and an anti-orthodox thinker are just a secular degradation of that narrative. But with Ballard, we now get that Mormon twist. But Ballard doesn't always just emphasize on that Mormon twist, trying to recast Washington and Lincoln and the Pilgrims as proto-Mormons. He also has another series, The American Covenant, which fits quite squarely into this broader Christian nationalist, and I would argue white Christian nationalist framework. And he would frequently do tours based on that American Covenant, taking people to these sacred historic sites and showing the connection between the divine and the American, which I would add several LDS leaders, including Russell Ballard, who we'll return to later in the video, have attended. I want to emphasize again, this is horrible history, but it's also a very particular theology, arguing that God works through these powerful white men, the world is a battleground between good and evil, and that America must return to their spiritual roots in order to find this political salvation. Notably, many of these books, though not all, were published by the LDS Church's publisher Deseret Book, and those books that were not published by Deseret Book were sold by Deseret Book, widely distributed by the church's publisher. That's why he became such a celebrity in LDS circles, because his books seem to have an imprimatur of authority from the LDS institution. Now, for a while, there were many who tried to separate Ballard, the horrible historian, and Ballard, who seemed to be a moral crusader trying to save women and children from these global sex trafficking rings. I myself probably fell in those categories early on, but it's important to note that those two spheres merged from the very beginning. In a way, those books were meant to reaffirm Ballard's position. I mean, just think about how those book titles referred to him. The Washington Hypothesis called him a modern-day investigator. The Lincoln Hypothesis called him a modern-day abolitionist. In other words, Ballard drew his reputation as a historical revisionist, pulling from this theological narrative of the past of the great man being inspired by God, and that Ballard himself is similarly inspired, a modern-day Messiah who's able to save these children from these horrible evils that God's chosen people have been opposing ever since the founding. This fit into the great white man approach to history. Perhaps no image capitalized on that more than the painter John McNaughton, one of the painters of white Christian nationalism in America, depicting Tim Ballard and the Operation Underground Railroad on the same platform as Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, and Harriet Tubman, capitalizing on him as this modern-day abolitionist. You see how these worlds are combining. It absolves white guilt and refers to the heroic myth of extralegal justice working outside corrupt systems. This is why you can see from the very beginning, if it sounds like it was meant for TV, that's because it was meant for TV. This message was especially powerful in LDS communities, as Ballard plays the role of a patriot prophet. He was very successful in fundraising in Mormon circles, getting lots of praise and support from some LDS authorities, though the extent of that is going to later be distributed. So he was able to capitalize on the reputation built by his Deseret Book published and Deseret Book sold books, while fulfilling the abolitionist legacies of his fictitious historical figures. In other words, Ballard the historian and Ballard the abolitionist worked in tandem to create past and present myths. Even before Ballard's public fall in 2023, there were plenty of people poking holes in those myths, especially the success and role of his OUR organization. Meg Conley, an independent journalist and wonderful writer, wrote a story that talked about how she went along one of these raids and what she experienced still haunts her. It showed her the problems with Ballard's approach. Anne Merlin at Vice had a series of articles disrupting these tales and showing that scholars, when looking at what OUR does, say that OUR is either greatly exaggerating the good they're doing, or they're doing active harm to these communities, especially in perpetuating those cycles of abuse and not respecting the rights of the victims. Even as his problems became well known, however, Ballard's celebrity only grew as he was embraced by a segment of society who desired that type of hero. He was appointed to Donald Trump's advisory council to oppose human trafficking in 2019. You see this image of him sitting at this meeting with President Trump. And many at that time even pointed out that Ballard's support of Trump's border wall demonstrated the hypocrisy in his program due to the problems that those who actually oppose and try to root out sex trafficking know that that border wall was going to cause increased problems. Again, the people who study this in depth recognize the broader systematic issues in place. And then over the years, OUR becomes increasingly QAnon adjacent, buying into that broader worldview of this global cabal of celebrities trying to drink the blood of children in order to maintain their own vitality and promote immortality. And then at one point, OUR leaders claimed without evidence that they had exposed a West African baby factory that had been the home of an alleged satanic ritual abuse scandal. Again, you can see how it's fitting into the broader cultural myths that were becoming much larger, especially within the MAGA movement. And then Ballard's hero worshipping seemed to climax in 2023 with a new movie, The Sound of Freedom, became a sensation that allegedly based on his life, filling into these myths that he had been cultivating for over a decade to this point, and became a very surprisingly popular, especially with the groundswell populist movement, although there is some evidence of astroturfing for some of those numbers. By 2023, Tim Ballard was rumored to be a leading contender to replace Mitt Romney as Utah's senator. It seemed that he already had the backing of the Utah Attorney General Sean Reyes, and so he seemed to be at the top of his game for his myths, fulfilling the anxiety of many who wanted to see a hero like that. And it was at that moment that he experienced a fall of monumental proportions. Even as the movie The Sound of Freedom, which was to be the culmination of this decades-long myth that Ballard had been constructed, even when that movie was coming out, internally his world was collapsing. There had been internal investigations within OUR about Ballard's inappropriate relations, with some women employees even accusing him of sexual misconduct. So he was forced out of OUR by the summer of 2023, though they tried to hide the details of why, at least for a while. And then in September of 2023, Vice News and Anne Merlin, who had been working on Ballard for years, dropped a bombshell. They had discovered that Ballard had been using the LDS apostle Russell Ballard, no relation, though there's the name overlap, in his not just his fundraising attempts, but in some of his scandalous activities, using the apostle Ballard's name to justify the OUR leader Ballard's activities. And so when they reached out for content, the LDS Church responded with a long statement denouncing Ballard. Here you see the full text. It claims that Tim Ballard was using Apostle Russell Ballard's name for morally unacceptable activities. It aimed to distance the LDS Church both from OUR and Ballard. And it can't be emphasized enough how rare this type of denunciation was. The LDS Church rarely speaks out on individual people, which shows how severe they saw those accusations. In fact, it was so rare that people wondered if this statement was real. Ballard himself seemed to sow fears that maybe this was created by his enemies. Eventually, the statement was confirmed, and shortly afterward, Ballard was excommunicated from the LDS Church, and Deseret Book removed all the books that they had been selling for him over the years. By the end of the year, Ballard was tied up in nearly a dozen lawsuits from women who had worked with him. Again, I don't want to dig into the actual issues, and a lot of the legal issues are still outstanding. That was 2 years ago. In the ensuing 24 months, Ballard, of course, does not have as much of a national platform, although he still does have a large following, especially in his social media accounts, and he continues to present himself as a modern-day abolitionist, though now primarily working in South American nations to a varying degree of success. He is affiliated publicly with Catholics, with evangelicals, and even still some Mormons, though the primary affiliation of those he works with now and those he praises is more political, trying to carve out a space redeeming his image among the MAGA world. Now, what prompted this video that I'm doing today is a video that he posted just a couple weeks ago on his Instagram account that he recorded in Jerusalem that kind of represents how far he has come since he used to be the poster boy for the LDS community and celebrated as a hero in the Utah region. So before I get in this video, and I'm going to break down this video like I would in a classroom, a little background. He recorded this video in some sacred rooms in Jerusalem, and he claims that while playing back one of the videos, he found that at the 56-second mark, there was a voice that just appeared. In later videos, he would dissect that voice in very mystical and supernatural ways. But he says that because the voice appeared at the 56-second mark, it made him start thinking about Isaiah 56, which led to this thoughtful exchange.
I saw Isaiah 56. Isaiah talks about the last days. And so I go to Isaiah 56, and sure enough, it's all about lukewarms. Okay, but even more specifically, talking about the watchmen on the tower have fallen asleep. And he says other things that I don't want to say because it's not nice. But it's Jesus, you know.
All right, let's break this down, because as I said, this video kind of captures his overall mindset, this theological worldview of good versus evil. So we need to define who these good versus evil people are. He denounces these people that he claims are watchmen. Who are these watchmen who he claims have become lukewarms? Lukewarms being this biblical verses. So Isaiah of people who have become lukewarm and God has therefore spewed them out the mouth. Well, in the LDS context, watchmen are usually referred to as LDS leaders, those who are watching out in the world to provide warning. So he's accusing that some type of watchmen are now failing in their job by becoming lukewarm. Let's see where he goes from there.
And it's talking about wake up, guys. Wake up. What are you doing? It talks about being greedy and talks about, look, I was the target. Children were the target. It's what I talked about in the upper room. I know what they're up to. Okay, I have it documented, and they actually sent a lawyer to warn me, saying that if you come out with this, we're going to embarrass you.
Okay, so now we know that these watchmen are specifically targeting Tim Ballard and have even threatened a lawsuit were he ever to talk about various things. So now we know a bit more that it's a personal feud with him and these watchmen. Let's hear a bit more.
Okay, that they're fighting this. They're fighting this. There's a deep state. I understand that. We need to pray for the watchmen. There's good ones, and they're all over the world. There's good ones all over the world, and there's not so good ones all over the world that are fulfilling Isaiah's words. Now,
okay, now we're getting some other key words of the overall mindset. These watchmen, of course, remember this is religious language that he's borrowing from the LDS tradition, are now part of the deep state that has infiltrated it, language that's used in the MAGA right to denounce those who are secretly infiltrating important positions in society to try to deny people their freedom, introduce corruption, and stop the redemption that's necessary for the nation. Now, I want to skip forward in the video just a little bit to confirm who he's talking about, because your guess, your assumption is right. He's talking about LDS leaders here, and this is how we know.
Because it's not about truth. It's about trying to make everybody happy. And they were afraid because I was being accused, okay, and they didn't want to be associated with me. And so not only were they not Matthew 18 compliant, and they know they weren't. I don't know how they're living. I don't know how they sleep at night. I truly don't. Because they know they weren't Matthew 18 compliant. In fact, they were proactively not Matthew 18 compliant. The policies that were given to the people that did this to me were literally, do not be proactive in not being Matthew 18 compliant. Don't let them tell the story. Don't let them tell the truth. Block witnesses, block everything. Section 102, boom, didn't happen. I'll say it again. Section 102 didn't happen. How do you do that? How do you do that?
So yeah, he's obviously talking about the LDS leaders who oversaw his excommunication. We know that because he references D&C 102, which is the LDS system, which outlines in the LDS scriptural canon their system of discipline, saying that the discipline proceedings against him were not properly followed. But now that we know what he's talking about, that he is referring to these watchmen who are part of the deep state as part of LDS authorities, not all of them, but at least some of them, I want to go back in the video a little bit. That was right before. This is a video that would have gone between the video I showed two before and this more recent one. And you'll see a bit of overlap. At the end of this video, you'll see the start of the last video I showed, because I want it to be clear that I am not unfairly slicing this, that these connections are the connections he made himself. And buckle up, because it's wild.
What happened to Charlie Kirk? It's all connected. Do not believe the false narrative. This was a lone shooter. It was not a lone shooter. This person who did this to Charlie was born of the same ideology of the lukewarms. Okay, because it's not about truth. It's about trying to make everybody happy. And they were afraid because I was being accused, okay, and they didn't want to be associated with me.
So while I don't think that Ballard is saying that the LDS Church is responsible for the tragedy that took place at Utah Valley University, he's not saying it. At the very least, he's claiming that the same deep state that's part of this covert and coordinated actions to attack people like Charlie Kirk had also infiltrated the LDS Church. Now, in the video, he goes on to show some clips of people being denounced as scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites. And then he closes the video with this.
Oh, what a tangled web we weave when at first we practice to deceive.
Yep, there's definitely a tangled web going on, but I think it looks more like this. And Ballard is the master weaver. Now, this is just a fitting end to this rise and fall story of Tim Ballard, going from a famous celebrity within LDS church communities to now denouncing the LDS Church as part of the deep state and part of these nefarious activities. But there's also a common through line here. This is part of a much larger theological saga of Tim Ballard's myth making, of these heroes opposing the global cabal of evil villains. It just so happens that before, the Mormons were on the good side in that cosmic battle, and now, in his views, the LDS Church is on the bad side. I hope this video made sense. If I missed anything that you find important in the story, please leave it in the comments. Like and share the video if you found it useful. Subscribe to the channel, and if you want to find a way to give back, please consider becoming a member, which allows us to keep doing these types of videos. History has never been more relevant than it is in the present, because it allows us to place these important events in a broader historical context, to demonstrate their cultural significance and hopefully take some lessons into the future.